Glizzy Gang. Check out the new single, Make It Hotter, at capitalhoops.com.
It was probably 2014. A friend of mine, I went to Bethesda Chevy Chase High School in Bethesda, Maryland, Montgomery County. A friend of mine was Shy Glizzy's manager. And Shy Glizzy wasn't who Shy Glizzy is today at that point. I mean, people knew who he was, but he wasn't the Shy Glizzy at that point. So my friend is like, you should get this guy to do a little like rap jingle and use it somehow. It wasn't at that point. I was just like, all right, let's run with it. I saw a couple of his videos. My friend was hyping him up like he was going to be the next like great thing, and he ended up being right. But so we went down to Southeast. We went to this studio in Southeast. I go in there. I pay Shy Glizzy a nominal amount of money, nothing crazy. I rent this studio out in Southeast, and we get into the studio, and rappers are in there like being rappers and getting loose and getting ready to like get their creative side together, you know? So I'm down there just kind of chilling out, like waiting to see what transpires. And Shy comes out and he's like, all right, Stern. He's like, what are we doing here? And I was just like, let's make a little song. And he's like, all right, he's like, give me some catchwords, give me some like phrases to use. So I'm like, all right. So it's like 2014. So I'm thinking of kind of the hot button topics in high school basketball at that point. So I'm like, you got to mention the Crime Stopper, because he's like, that's like the number one thing you got to mention. Springbrook High School in Montgomery County had just won back-to-back state championships. So I was like, you got to mention something about Springbrook winning back-to-back. I was like, maybe throw in the word WCAC in there. I was like, you know, you can talk about DC things if you want. You can talk about Allen Iverson at Georgetown or the Wizards, or just throw in some basketball phrases if you want. And he was like, all right. And he sits there, and it was actually on his iPhone. He starts kind of like typing the song on his iPhone, or typing something on his iPhone. And then he goes back into the cut and puts his headset on, and they close the box, and everyone's on the other side of it, and the engineer guy is like making beats, and he just starts going, and he just makes this song up. And the I swooch capital hoops was like his little hook, but there's like a full-on song.
Live from the streets of Washington, D.C., on the corner where sports and culture meets hip-hop. Sharing stories of the DMV and spitting fire for the whole damn country. This is First and Told with Chad Ricardo and Darrell Bucknight.
When you first heard that Coach Jones was stepping down, at first it was a rumor, then it became reality. When you first heard those rumors swirling and when the news was confirmed, who did you think would take over for Coach Jones? Who in your mind would have been a great replacement? Was Strickland in your mind? Was there somebody else who you thought of? Who did you think was going to take over for Mike Jones at that head coaching position at DeMatha?
I mean, Coach Strickland was someone, when I talked to people about this, he was someone who was on the list. I don't know if he was at the top of the list, but he was someone who I thought had a shot at it. I mean, he's a DeMatha guy. I thought first and foremost, it's going to be really important to get a DeMatha guy in there. So you kind of narrow the field down a lot with that, you know, with that thought process. I mean, other guys, Corey McCray, who was under Mike for a while, was an assistant at Delaware, was a guy a lot of people thought was probably in the conversation. Dwayne Simpkins at George Mason was a guy a lot of people thought was probably in the conversation. And then all the current DeMatha assistants were in the conversation. I mean, there were others. I mean, Keith Bogans is obviously a DeMatha guy through and through. He coaches in the G League right now. He's got a big personality. He's got kind of that, you know, I mean, he's a known figure, so to speak. So I thought, I don't know, maybe they could go in that direction.
You know, one of the things that I want to touch on from your interview that you did with Coach Strickland, and by the way, it was a great interview. You got the exclusive with him the day after he was announced as head coach there. One of the things that he brought up that I thought was interesting was the fact that As you alluded to, there are so many different things now, things that are different now than they were back then, from when he played or when he coached or even when he graduated from DeMatha. The recruiting landscape and how so many players are transferring, going from school to school or college to college. The one and done aspect in college athletics. Even, the way the game is played, the pace at which it's played is much different than it was 40 years ago. Do you think coming into DeMatha, or going into DeMatha, I should say, there will be some sort of maybe disconnect between he and the players now because of the way and style he may be accustomed to as opposed to what these players are used to? Do you think there's a an indifference or an imbalance there, and how do you think he can just grow accustomed to the new way of basketball?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I don't know Coach Strickland that well. I've been seeing him kind of around in basketball atmospheres and environments for the past decade. I used to see him at Magruder High School all the time. He's really good friends with the coach at Magruder there. And I've gotten to know him a little bit, not close with him, but he's certainly tied into the game. I mean, even though he kind of grew up playing under Morgan Wooten and coached under Wooten, which was a long time ago, it's not like he has been removed from the game for 25 years and he's just like, coming out from under a rock and he's used to the game being played the way it was 25 years ago. I mean, I'm sure he watches basketball every day. Yeah. He's around basketball all the time. So, I think he understands that the climate has changed a little bit. I think every good coach will tell you that they need to have adaptability. That's a really important trait to have, is you got to kind of change with the times, change with your personnel is important. And, I'm sure he's aware that that's probably somewhat important. I mean, he's going to instill old principles, I'm sure, as well, that he was coached when he was a player, like every coach does. They take pieces of everything they've learned throughout their journey. But, it's something to kind of be aware of, but any good coach should be able to adjust, to some degree. And the other part about it is, you're going to have a staff too. It's not just you. He's the kind of the main figure, but, especially a place like DeMatha that generally has 5, 8, 9 assistant coaches, like there's going to be other people in the room to kind of help from that perspective.
First and Told the podcast, my guy, Marc Stern, Media Goat, Capital Hoops. You want to talk about basketball in the DMV, you don't cross that bridge without permission from our guest here today. Stern, I want to go back to your interview with Coach Strickland as well. You all talked about the history of the interim title for head coaches with DeMatha. The fact that Coach Jones had that title previously, that's not something that I knew. Talk to me about the history of that title and what Coach Strickland being named interim, what that means to you and what it means to Coach Strickland per your conversation.
Yeah, I think interim is pretty self-explanatory. Like, you have the job right now. It's your job. You need to prove yourself. It's not a guarantee for the future, but it's your opportunity right now. You need to seize that opportunity, whether that's from a recruiting front, whether that's from a wins and losses perspective, whether that's from a connecting with the DeMatha basketball culture perspective. I'm sure it's a little bit of all of those, but I think, I asked him that question pretty directly, and I think he said, I was hired, and I don't really know how long for, but I need to prove myself, and hopefully if I prove myself, then the title will go away. And I think anyone who's an interim coach under any circumstance has aspirations for that interim title to depart at some point.
You have an opportunity, as we've alluded to not only be around this powerful DeMatha program, but all of the great basketball programs that are here in DC, and this is one of the richest high school coaches that we have here. But speaking specifically about this DeMatha team, they were absolutely outstanding the last time that we saw them on the basketball courts in regular play. They were WCAC champions. They did really well in all of the leagues that they were able to play in during the COVID times as well. This team has very high expectations. Whether we're talking about Coach Strickland or whether we're talking about anyone else, what makes the right head coach for the DeMatha Stags job?
I think someone who has really good principles is a leader. I think someone who is a DeMatha guy is a really important trait. I mean, everyone thinks they kind of know what DeMatha is all about, but if you've been brought up in that climate, in that environment, I think it means a lot more to you, and you kind of understand things that maybe outsiders don't understand. I mean, I'm an outsider. I didn't go to DeMatha. I mean, I know a lot of the folks over there, but there's things I'm always learning about that school. The tradition is obviously very rich, but I think the traits that are important for that coach, someone who commands respect, someone who everyone looks up to, you know? I mean, that Coach Jones and Coach Wooten had that quality in spades. Just someone who's really respected, who everyone looks up to.
So I want to get into something that I think a lot of people are wondering, and I want to take you back a little bit. So I graduated from Gonzaga in 2015. I got there in 2011, and I was actually an intern for DC Sports Fan. You were talking about them a bit earlier. And I remember being on sidelines at football games and baselines at basketball games and seeing this guy with a camera and like a little stool that he would take around and kneel on and sit on to capture footage. And I always said to myself, who is this guy? You know, I always saw coaches coming up to you and players coming up to you and you doing all these post-game and pre-game interviews and getting everybody to just talk to you. And I'm like, who is this? And then I do a little bit of research and hear some word of mouth that this is Marc Stern of Capitol Hoops. And I go on Capitol Hoops and go on YouTube and I hear the jingle, I ball, I shoot, swoosh Capitol Hoops, and I'm like, wow, this guy is really, really cool. So, you know, I just want to know, how did Marc Stern become such a beacon for media and DC hoops and really DMV hoops? How does everybody know you? How did you get your start and become the media power that you are today?
Well, I appreciate the words you just spoke about me. It means a lot. So I actually have, I guess it's probably going to be a surprise for you guys, I actually did not start Capitol Hoops.
Okay.
There was a gentleman who started it. His name was Tim Chalastri, and I want to say he started Capitol Hoops around 2006, 7-ish.
Really?
And I was actually working for the Washington Wizards at the time, and I was a big fan of Capitol Hoops, and I was always going to their website because I grew up in the DMV and I was always a big DMV basketball guy. So I was always going on the website and watching highlights and watching interviews and reading his material just for fun, you know. And one day he put an ad up on the site that he was looking for someone to kind of help him out and just go cover games. And, you know, it was like during the evenings and on weekends. And I reached out to him and I was like, I'd be willing to, you know, hit a game up every now and then and kind of help you out. So I met with him, and I want to say he gave me the first camera I ever used. Now this was like 2009, 8, something like that. And it was like a camera from the Stone Age, but that was the first camera I ever used. And I would go out to like Montrose Christian, and I remember going to St. John's, National Christian. I mean, you know, pretty much the same schools that, you know, that I go to now. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. All of a sudden, I did this with him for maybe a year or so. And one day he just tells me that he's done with Capitol Hoops. So this is the weirdest story ever. So he tells me he's done with Capitol Hoops, and what he tells me is he's got some website somewhere, I think it was in Asia, okay, that wants to buy the domain Capitol Hoops because of the amount of traffic that was going to it, because they felt they could put ads up with his traffic and monetize the website. And I'm like, you are crazy. You're not going to give away all of what you've built for 3 years to some dude in Asia who's trying to like peddle diapers or whatever he's trying to do. So I'm like, let me buy Capitol Hoops from you. I'm looking for something new to do, something where I can be more connected to basketball and not to sales, which was kind of where I was with the Wizards. And we negotiated, and I bought the company from him, and he had done an amazing job. So back then when he was doing it, there was no other media outlet. It was him and the Washington Post, and maybe DC Sports Fan. So there was no competition. He was the only guy who did video, the only guy. I mean, maybe like the news station would send a camera out there. So he was. I mean, Capitol Hoops was as jumping then as it is now, but with the way technology has kind of changed, it's much more like in your face now than it was then. Back then, you had to kind of look for it, and now like you got to look away if you don't want to see it, you know. But so I bought the company from him, and then it was a slow grind for a couple of years. Everyone was used to Tim, and now this new guy enters the fold who's just trying to like pick the pieces up where Tim left off, and everyone's like, I don't know this guy, you know. So I had to kind of put some work in, make sure my face was known. And after, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I felt like people started to respect me a little bit.
So this is a bit of an interesting follow-up to that. You've obviously covered a lot, and you've seen a lot, and you've experienced and captured so many different moments in your media career over the past decade plus, really. What is that one moment that you'll just never forget? One moment you recorded or captured that will always remain in your mind, something that maybe set Capitol Hoops apart, maybe something that solidified your name in the DMV and the media scene. What was that one moment for you?
So the best individual moment, like one play, I would have to say is the game where I was sitting next to your co-host right there, the Sidwell Championship.
The Sidwell.
I mean, if I had to say one individual play, it doesn't get any better than that, right? Now, if you were to say like a player, a team, like something broader than that, and this isn't necessarily DMV, but it's someone I covered very closely, I would have to say Akil Carr. I mean, it was just like the craziest circus that followed this guy. He was so like mesmerizing, had this swag about him that I've like never seen prior or since. And he was, I don't know, he just had like this aura about him that was just like out of a movie, you know?
Let's look, Stern. Let's stay right there and let's matriculate this a little bit forward. I'm going to put you a bit on the hot seat here. You just spoke about Carr. Give me the top 5 student athletes. I don't want to know who was the best, but give me the top 5 student athletes. Your top 5 that you've enjoyed covering the most.
I mean, so I'm a little biased when I answer this, when I say Markel Fultz and Emmanuel Quickly, because obviously they made it to the NBA and they're stars right now, but I did these really in-depth documentary series with them where I was like going into their homes on a weekly basis and like eating dinner with them and doing interviews and getting to know their grandmothers and aunts and extended family. And they were so welcoming to me, and you know, and it was just really cool getting to know someone on a deeper level than your typical post-game interview when you ask them a few questions and they give you a few generic answers and you move on. So, I mean, those two jump off the top for sure. And then Luka Garza was really fun to cover. Oh, Hunter Dickinson. Hunter Dickinson is like the biggest character ever. And I guess a lot of people know that, but he's like funny. He's got like the biggest personality of a player. Most players, at least with me, it might be different with you, but they're a little shy to open up and really like, they don't act the same way around me that they would with their friends. And I don't know if they're guarded, or I don't know how to like phrase it the right way, but Hunter was just like, didn't hold back, was hilarious, spoke his mind, would make jokes with you off camera. I mean, he was a lot of fun to kind of be around. I'll tell you a player I loved getting to know. He was just like the nicest, most genuine person maybe I've ever interacted with was Casey Morcell from St. John's.
Yeah.
He was just like the nicest dude. Would always come up to me, ask me how I'm doing. Like, what game were you at last night? Like just like a really genuinely nice guy. Is that it, or do I need to name more?
Look, I mean, I was gonna let you keep going, bro, but that's it. Look, we definitely want to give a shout out and congratulations to Hunter Dickinson as he just put his name, of course, in the hat for the NBA draft. A quick follow up on that though, because you spoke to the fact that you did documentaries. I can't let you go without asking you this. You spoke to the fact that you did a documentary on Markel Fultz in particular. Documentaries are in depth. You get an opportunity to see, as you stated, where a person comes from. You get a little bit into their actual world. That said, did it take you by surprise when he was initially having some struggles adjusting to the NBA game? He's come out of it and he's now having a tremendous career, but did it catch you by surprise when he had those initial struggles?
I mean, I mean, yes. To answer the question shortly, yes, for sure. I mean, anytime a number one pick and a player like that has, when something doesn't go according to plan, I think everyone is surprised to some degree. I think the part with him was, it was like a very unique injury that it seemed like they couldn't really diagnose like what was going on. I know eventually it was the thoracic, I forget the exact terminology, the thoracic outlet syndrome, I think it's called. But it seems like it took a while to figure out that it was that and outrule whatever else it could have potentially been. So it was tough to see, guys pick behind him who were, doing really well, and he was hurt, and it was tough. I was very surprised.
Marc Stern of Capitol Hoops joining us here on the First and Told podcast. Stern, as we take a look at Capitol Hoops, and D. Darrell, he spoke to this a moment ago, your brand truly is synonymous with DC sports. I myself knew your jingle before I ever knew you. And in fact, don't tell Marc Stern, but I used to cut out clips of your videos and use them in my productions before I ever knew you. So your brand is synonymous with DC basketball. DC basketball is one of the richest cultures of basketball in the country. What does it mean to you to know that the DC legacy is tied to Capitol Hoops?
I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know. No one's really put it to me like that before. I just
Stern,
think of
I'm putting
myself
it to you like that right now, brother.
I mean, it feels amazing to hear you give me those compliments and speak to me with admiration like that. I mean, it feels tremendous. I put a lot of work in, and I've hustled really, really, really hard, and haven't made much money with Capitol Hoops, and it's just been like a passion and a grind, and I mean, it feels great, a lot of people behind the cameras and people who kind of do our line of work kind of sit in the background and don't really get the limelight. And I've always been cool with that. And, I mean, it obviously feels great. I mean, but there's so more than just me. I mean, I'm one of the kind of older guys, I guess, who's in this business. So from that perspective, I've been around for a while, but there's so many other people who are like putting in serious work with this that it goes way beyond me and Capitol Hoops. I mean, there's more people doing videos these days than I have followers on Instagram. I mean, every day there's 5 new people I need to follow to watch the highlights from the night before. So
when I look at you and what Capitol Hoops has done in basketball, I did a lot of the same things, the same pioneering in football as well. The landscape, you talked about the landscape when you first got in. There was not really many more people than you. When I first got in, I was one of, if not the only person on the sidelines with an iPad at that point in time. No one else was doing that. Nowadays, You look around, bro. At any game, it's hard to even walk up and down the sidelines or the field because there are so many people that are shooting and they're producing this excellent artwork. I know that, and I'm sure that you feel the same way. I believe as OGs of the game, that it's not our job to kind of shun these younger producers, but to encourage them and to help them potentially build the careers that we've been able to build. So what advice would you give to those young producers who have a desire to go from just making beautiful pictures to actually turning and growing their product into a business as you have?
Yeah, so before I answer your question, I love the climate of all the young videographers and stuff. We have so many interns that help us run the summer league over at DeMatha that I run, and a lot of these, young people who do this come and intern for me and use that as kind of a segue to branch out and do their old thing. I know you guys are friends with Donnell. Donnell interned with me a couple years ago and kind of got his foot in the door and kind of learned a little bit about, the whole media thing, and then branched off and started his own thing. And it like in basketball, there's like coaching trees, right? And a coach will have a former assistant who goes on and there's like a tree. And I honestly feel like I have this little like media tree under me, and it honestly like warms my heart that I'm able to give these people opportunities and expose them to things and give them access to things that maybe they wouldn't have, a normal opportunity to have access to. And every year when I interview, which I'm doing right now, potential interns for Summer League, I always make sure to tell them about the people in the past who have gone on to forge, different careers and outlets and that type of stuff. And I feel it makes me feel amazing that I can help these kids, like give them a platform to kind of grow and do their own thing. I think hard work is so important. I'm really torn. So the adage, work smarter, not harder. I'm so torn on whether I subscribe to that or not. Because I've always been a work harder type guy, and maybe I haven't been smart as a byproduct of that. But I think working hard and just being there and not being lazy and like putting yourself out there and just grinding is the number one thing. I think being approachable is really, really important. Like giving people the time to talk to you, answering people's questions, replying to their emails and stuff is really important too.
That's what's up, bro. That is why that answer in its totality is why you are not only an OG, but you are also an absolute GOAT. Marc Stern, Capital Hoops, thank you so very much for stopping by First and Told.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
First and Told.